I was not sentenced in a hall of judgment with banners and witnesses. I was processed in an intake corridor that smelled of antiseptic, rust, and a fear so old it had soaked into the metal. The lumen strips above flickered in a tired rhythm, stuttering like a failing heart, casting the oath board in pulses of sickly white and shadow. When the light dimmed, the words carved into the board seemed to crawl. When it brightened, they burned into my eyes. I stood there with my boots aligned to a yellow line, worn thin by generations of other men who thought they were still citizens when they arrived. The oath itself was not read aloud. It was displayed. Paragraphs of devotional legalese scrolled across a cracked slate, each clause numbered, indexed, and cross-referenced to punishments I was advised not to imagine. I pressed my thumb to the reader when instructed. The machine bit me, drew blood, and hummed with satisfaction. The ink that followed smelled sharp and clinical, laced with something coppery and intimate. I remember thinking it smelled like a decay ward after a riot, cleaning chemicals fighting a losing war against what had already happened. They took my name first, not ceremonially. A clerk in a stained robe glanced at my papers, frowned, and struck it through with a single practiced line. In its place he stamped a designation code that was longer than my old name had ever been. He told me this was mercy. Names, he said, attracted attention. Codes were easier to forgive when erased. The respirator was next. Issued without comment, its strap stiff with dried sweat. When I inhaled, I tasted someone else's breath layered beneath my own, stale and faintly sweet with panic. I tried not to think about where the previous owner had gone. The quartermaster slid a rule book across the counter with both hands, as if it were a sacred text. It was heavier than my ration pack and twice as thick. Its pages were thin, translucent, and edged with warning sigils in red ink. I flipped it open and immediately closed it again. The margins were already filled with handwritten addenda, amendments, and corrections, each signed by an authority I would never meet. The intake corridor stretched away from the desk, like a throat swallowing me whole. Its walls were layered with centuries of repainting, the original steel showing through in scabbed patches. Purity seals clung everywhere, on door frames, on conduit housings, even on the floor at intervals, most of them cracked, peeling, or curling at the edges like dead skin. Wax dripped down the walls in hardened tears. Each seal bore a prayer or a warning, and sometimes both, written so small you had to lean close to read them. I did not lean close. I had already been told that lingering was suspicious. Every step echoed, not just the sound of boots on metal, but the echo of inspection slates clicking, of catechisms being recited over the vox by unseen mouths. The building spoke constantly, a low murmur of reminders and threats. Compliance is survival, silence is loyalty, thought is a gateway. The phrases overlapped and repeated until they lost meaning and became texture, like the hum of a generator you only notice when it stops. I passed other recruits being processed in silence. We did not look at one another for long. Eye contact was discouraged, familiarity bred deviation. One man ahead of me was shaking so badly his docket rattled against his chest. A servitor brushed past us, its augmetic limbs whirring softly as it scrubbed the floor with chemical foam. Its eyes were gone, replaced with lens caps stamped with the sigil of the department that owned it. I envied its certainty. It had already been simplified. At the first checkpoint, a senior guard, his armor patched and repatched, his respirator fused permanently to his face, recited my assignment in a flat voice. Guard detail, special containment, rotational shifts, no fraternization, no speculation, no unauthorized prayer. When he reached the end, he paused, as if considering whether to add something. He did not. He simply stamped my docket again, harder this time, and gestured down the corridor. As I walked, I told myself what everyone tells themselves when faced with an unpleasant duty, that it could be worse. Guarding the damned was safer than being damned. I repeated it silently, sensing the words to my footsteps. The idea settled over me like a thin blanket, offering just enough comfort to keep me moving. I had not yet learned how thin blankets feel in winter. The air changed as I went deeper. It grew colder, drier, carrying a faint electrical tang that made my teeth ache. Incense burned somewhere out of sight, not the warm, resinous kind from public shrines, but a harsher blend meant to placate machines. It caught at the back of my throat and lingered there, like a confession you can't quite swallow. My respirator filtered most of it, but not all. I wondered if that was intentional. We stopped beneath another oath board, this one smaller, its surface scarred by impact marks. A robed official waited there, flanked by 2 enforcers holding shock malls at rest. He made us recite a catechism of vigilance, line by line, our voices overlapping and wavering. When one man stumbled over a word, the official corrected him gently, then nodded to the enforcer. The shock maul cracked once. The man did not fall, but he did not stumble again. At the end of the corridor, the doors to the inner facility loomed. They were vast slabs of reinforced metal, layered with wards, locks, and warning glyphs. Each glyph pulsed faintly, as if alive. I felt a pressure behind my eyes just looking at them, a sensation like standing too close to a furnace. The official noticed my hesitation and leaned close enough that I could smell the oil on his robes. "Do not imagine what is behind them," he whispered, his voice amplified slightly by hidden augmetics. "Imagination is a form of trespass. The doors did not open for us then. This was only intake, orientation, a reminder of scale." We were turned away and directed to our barracks, our footsteps retracing part of the path we had come. As we walked, I caught myself glancing back, half expecting the doors to move on their own. They remained closed, patient and absolute. In the barracks, I lay on my assigned cot and listened to the building breathe. Somewhere deep within, something shifted, a distant thrum like a heartbeat out of sync with my own. I clutched my rulebook to my chest and told myself again that this was better than the alternatives. That I would serve, endure, and be released. That the intake corridor was just another hallway, the oath just another form. I believed it for nearly an hour. When the lights dimmed to night, Psyker and the catechisms softened to a whisper, I realized the building had never stopped watching me. The oath board's words lingered behind my eyelids, burned there by flickering lumen light. I understood then that the intake corridor had not been an entrance. It had been a narrowing, a place where choices thinned to a single file, where names were stripped away so there would be nothing left to scream when the walls closed in. They woke us before the lumen strips fully warmed, when the corridor light still shivered between dim and dead, and the air had that stale, metallic taste of recycled night. A klaxon did not blare. That would have implied urgency, and urgency was disorder. Instead, a chime sounded polite, measured, bureaucratic, followed by a vox voice that spoke like a clerk reading charges. Shift cycle begins. Attendance verification required. Non-compliance will be recorded. The voice never rose, never threatened. It didn't have to. In this place, threat was not volume. Threat was documentation. We assembled in the roll, call bay beneath a mural of the Emperor's stern gaze rendered in chipped mosaic. The tiles were missing in places, leaving pockmarks where the face should have been whole. A lectern stood before us, and behind it an officer in a grey coat, with a collar stiffened by purity stitching. He didn't look at our faces. He looked at our dockets. Each of us held a stamped paper packet, thick as a ration brick, wrapped in twine and sealed with wax. It was called the Containment Compliance Ledger, though the veterans just called it the book, in the same tone a man might use for an executioner. "We're guard with ink," the officer said, and the words fell flat, like a doctrine repeated too often to retain meaning. "We're secure with countersigns. We preserve the Imperium through correct filing." He handed out our daily forms the way a priest might distribute wafers with ritual, with boredom, with absolute certainty that the act mattered more than the recipient. There were checklists for door seals, charts for lumen flicker patterns, incident logs, sealed in their own envelopes as if even blank paper could be contagious. There was a form titled Unauthorized Mental Activity Self-Report, and its margins were already marked with tiny printed prayers asking for forgiveness in advance. We marched to the command annex, a long room of consoles and brass, cased screens that glowed an anemic green. Servo skulls hovered along the ceiling rails, their lenses clicking as they tracked our movement. Their wings buzzed in a constant, maddening whir, like insects that had learned to prey. Each station had a slate chained to it with a short length of steel, as if the facility feared we might try to run with our own records. My post was seal verification, Tier 2, corridor segment 18 through 21. That meant I would spend my shift walking the same stretch of passageway, checking the wax integrity on purity seals, recording the exact angle of each ribbon's curl, and confirming that each warding glyph pulsed at its prescribed rhythm. I would do this while armed, armored, and watched, because the weapon was ceremonial and the paperwork was real. They taught us to read the doors the way scribes read scripture. Each blast door had 3 layers of identification: the physical serial plates, the cogitator's internal code, and the liturgical designation written in high Gothic along the frame. I was instructed never to favor one identifier over another. If the serial plate read E19 but the liturgy read E18, I was to report it immediately. Not because a mismatch could mean a breach, though it might, but because a mismatch meant the records did not agree with the metal. And in this prison the records were more sacred than the metal. I began my rounds at the first door in my segment. The purity seals were thick here, layered over one another, wax pressed into old wax. I ran my gloved fingers along them and felt cracks beneath the surface, tiny fractures like dried lips. The rulebook told me how many cracks were permissible before escalation. It also told me that escalation could result in disciplinary action against the guard who first noticed the crack, for failing to prevent it. Prevention, I learned, was defined as anything that had not yet happened. I logged the cracks anyway. My slate accepted the entry with a soft chime, and I felt a foolish satisfaction at that sound, as if compliance was a small warmth in a cold place. The air in the corridor tasted wrong. Not poisonous. Our respirators would have alerted, but wrong in a subtler way. The facility recycled its atmosphere constantly, scrubbing it through filters and incense burners and machine lung ducts. What remained was a blend of metal dust, disinfectant, and that peculiar bitter, sweet aroma of machine incense. It clung to the tongue like guilt. I found myself swallowing repeatedly, trying to clear it, and only making the taste more persistent. From behind the doors came nothing at first. No banging, no screaming, none of the dramatics the Hive's street sermons used to describe witches. Instead, there was a faint vibration, almost too low to hear, like distant machinery. Sometimes it aligned with my heartbeat. Sometimes it didn't. The veterans told me not to listen for it. They said the prison punished curiosity long before it punished disobedience. Every hour I returned to the annex to file my entries. The process took longer than the rounds. Each note required a countersign from a supervising officer. Each countersign required a seal. Each seal required a verification stamp. We lined up in silence, slates held at chest level, waiting to be approved like supplicants. Above us, a framed decree read, THEMPRPRDCSTDLETRK. A man ahead of me forgot to initial a box marked Lumen Integrity Confirmed. It was a tiny omission. The sort of mistake that in any sane garrison would have earned a scowl and a correction. Here, it earned a summons. 2 enforcers approached him without haste and took him by the elbows. He tried to explain, stammering, offering to fix it, but the supervisor didn't even look up. Incomplete documentation, the supervisor said. Potential concealment, potential contamination. The enforcers led the man away through a side door marked Edimayanezievrikifi. No one asked where that door led. We all knew better than to attach our thoughts to an unfiled question. Later, a veteran guard leaned toward me while we stood at the ink station, refilling our styluses from a communal vial. "Rule 1, he murmured, his respirator hissing softly. "Don't say the word." "What word?" I asked, already regretting it. He didn't answer directly. He tapped the side of his helmet where a small sensor sigil had been painted. Asset. Anomaly. Unit. Anything but the true term. The walls here. The slates here. Sometimes they hear through you. I laughed once, a small nervous sound, and it died in my mask. The veteran's eyes remained flat. "You'll learn," he said. The next time I returned to my corridor, I noticed new signage. Not new in the sense of freshly installed. Nothing here was fresh, but newly visible, like words that had been there all along and simply chosen to reveal themselves. A plaque near door E20 bore a warning in block script. "Do not resti cotain," and beneath it in smaller script, "Do not respondi fad." Beneath that, almost hidden by grime, "Do no tik off team spople." I stood there longer than regulation allowed, staring. The plaque was cold even through my glove. A servo skull drifted closer, lens focusing. I forced myself to move. At the end of my segment was a vent grill, bolted in place and sealed with red wax. Warm air breathed from it in slow pulses, carrying the muffled sounds of the lower tiers, the distant clank of machinery, the faint hiss of pressure valves, and, if I let myself listen, the low murmur of voices too far away to pass. They didn't sound like screams. They sounded like conversation overheard through a wall, intimate and ordinary, which was somehow worse. I returned to the annex again and again, filing, stamping, countersigning. My hands became permanently ink-stained. The black seeped into the creases of my gloves and the cracked skin beneath. The ink smelled of antiseptic and old fear, just like the oath boards. By mid-shift, my eyes ached from staring at green runes and tiny printed prayers. My shoulders ached from carrying the rulebook, as if it were a second piece of armor strapped to my spine. The prison did not reward diligence with rest. It rewarded it with more tasks. A supervisor noticed my logs were neatly written and assigned me additional forms, behavioral observation summary, though I never once saw an inmate's face. Atmospheric variance record, though my respirator filtered the air into the same bitter taste each hour. Personal deviation self-audit, which required me to list any unapproved thoughts I had experienced during my shift. I stared at that last form for a long time. The box beneath the question was small, too small for a human mind. In the end I wrote no deviations noted. I sealed it with wax. I stamped it. I handed it in. The supervisor nodded, satisfied, and filed it into a drawer already overflowing with identical lies. When my shift ended, I didn't feel relief. I felt a dull, bureaucratic exhaustion, as if my soul had been processed in triplicate. I returned to the barracks with my slate still humming softly, its memory full of entries that would outlive me. The building's catechisms continued through the night cycle, quieter now, like a lullaby meant to soothe compliance into sleep. As I lay on my cot, the taste of machine incense still clinging to my tongue, I realized something with a slow, sinking dread. I had spent an entire day guarding doors I never opened, recording threats I never saw, and fearing a mistake on paper more than any weapon behind the walls. And somewhere, faint as breath through a vent, the murmurs continued, sliding between the cracks of metal and doctrine, until even the margins of my thoughts felt like they were trembling. The first incident was logged at precisely 00:30:14 by facility chronometers, though it did not feel precise when it happened. Nothing ever does, once it reaches you through layers of regulation and delay. I was stationed at the Vox Grill for Corridor Segment 19, conducting a routine devotional transmission as mandated by the Containment Morale Appendix, an appendix longer than most lives. The prayer was printed on my slate, syllables broken into approved phonetic units to prevent deviation. I spoke them aloud in a flat, steady cadence, my respirator modulating my voice into something barely human. Be vigilance we endure, I recited. For silence we remain pure. By record and seal. There was a second voice. It did not interrupt me. It did not speak over me. It slid beneath my words, perfectly timed, like a shadow aligning itself with a body. At first I thought it was feedback, a Vox loop, some minor technical fault that would earn me a reprimand for not recalibrating. Then the voice shaped itself into language, intimate and wet, close enough that I felt it against the inside of my skull rather than my ears. It finished the prayer with me, not in high Gothic, not in the approved phonetics, in the low gutter dialect of the Hab block where I had grown up, using a cadence my mother used when she thought I was asleep. My stomach clenched so hard I gagged, bile flooding my mouth and splattering the inside of my mask. I tore the respirator free, just long enough to retch onto the grated floor, the smell sharp and acidic, mixing with incense and metal. The Vox grill crackled softly, patient, as if waiting for me to continue. I slammed the emergency cut-off rune with a shaking finger. The grill went dark. The corridor lights dimmed in response, not fully, but enough to make the shadows stretch and breathe. I stood there, hunched, saliva stringing from my mouth, heart hammering against my chest plate like it wanted out of the paperwork and into oblivion. Protocol returned to me slowly, like a mantra dragged up from deep water. Incident. Log it. Do not interpret. Do not react beyond prescribed limits. I staggered back to the annex, boots slipping slightly on my own vomit, and locked myself into a data booth. My hands shook so badly I had to brace my wrist against the slate to keep the stylus steady. The form was already waiting for me, as if the system had anticipated the event. Auditory anomaly report, cause undetermined, duration momentary, content non-compliant, vocalization. I hesitated over the content field. The words I wanted to write felt heavy, dangerous, like contraband. I settled for clinical language, stripping the experience down to something that looked harmless on paper. Secondary vocal pattern detected beneath authorized transmission. Source unknown. Emotional response nausea. I submitted the report. The slate chimed. A servo skull drifted closer to my booth, its lens whirring as it scanned my face. For a moment, I was certain it could hear my thoughts, that it would flag the memory still echoing in my head. Then it drifted away, satisfied. They called it an auditory anomaly in the official response, stamped in red ink so fresh it bled through the page. No further action required. Recommendation: increase prayer volume by 3%. When I returned to my post, the corridor felt different. The air seemed thicker, harder to draw into my lungs even with the respirator sealed tight. The lights no longer flickered randomly. They dimmed and brightened in slow, deliberate patterns. Like breathing, I found myself unconsciously matching my own breaths to the rhythm, and had to force myself to stop. The other guards noticed it too. No one said anything at first. We were well trained in silence, but I saw it in the way they checked their seals twice, 3 times, pressing wax back into place with trembling thumbs. One man muttered a prayer under his breath, and then immediately reported himself for unauthorized devotion, his face pale as parchment. At the next shift briefing, a supervisor addressed us from behind the lectern, his voice amplified and flat. "You may experience minor sensory irregularities," he said, as if reading from a weather report. "These are expected within a facility of this classification. Do not assign meaning. Meaning invites speculation. Speculation invites contamination." I wrote that down. It felt important. The whispers did not return immediately. That was almost worse. Instead, there was a sense of anticipation, like standing in a chapel just before the bells ring. Every sound became suspect. The hiss of my respirator, the distant clank of machinery, the soft click of a servo skull's wings. I found myself flinching at my own footsteps, half expecting them to answer back. When the whispers came again, they did so through the vents. I was passing vent cluster C when I heard my designation code spoken softly, syllables drawn out as if tasted. I froze, every muscle locking. The rule book was clear. Auditory engagement constitutes breach of mental perimeter. I did not answer. I did not even turn my head. I stared straight ahead at the wall, counting the cracks in the paint, feeling sweat pool beneath my armor. The voice continued anyway, murmuring fragments of memory it had no right to possess. The smell of boiled starch from the Hab kitchens. The sound of rain on rusted roofing. A promise I had made once, to someone whose face I could no longer clearly recall. Each word pressed against the inside of my skull, testing for weakness. I fled back to the annex and filed another report, this one longer, more detailed. I watched as a censor stamp came down hard, smashing entire paragraphs into black bars. The supervisor didn't even read it. He simply marked it reviewed and slid it into a drawer already groaning with suppressed truth. That night I dreamed of paperwork. I stood in a vast archive hall, shelves stretching up into darkness, each one packed with ledgers bound in human skin. Servitors shuffled past, whispering my code number as they filed me into place. I tried to scream, but my mouth filled with ink, thick and choking. When I woke, my pillow was damp with sweat, and my fingers were curled as if still gripping a stylus. The dreams became routine after that. Each one ended the same way, with my confession being stamped, sealed, and used against me. During waking hours, the building seemed to lean closer. The catechisms grew more personal, the vox voices lingering on certain words as if savoring them. Silence, they intoned. Vigilance. Confession. I began to dread the sound of my own thoughts, fearing they might echo. A veteran guard cornered me near the ration dispensary, his voice low. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "Write less," he advised. "The more you explain, the more they cut away. Leave room for mercy." I wanted to ask who they were, but the question felt dangerous, like stepping over a line I couldn't see. By the end of the cycle, my hands shook constantly. Ink blotted my forms where the stylus slipped. I corrected each mistake meticulously, terrified of leaving a mark that would draw attention. The whispers grew bolder, sliding into the spaces between my prayers, my reports, my breaths. I realized then that the prison was not merely containing something. It was listening. And in listening, it was learning the shape of me, the sound of my fear, the exact words that would make me break. When the lights dimmed for night cycle and the vents sighed softly overhead, I lay awake and waited for my name, or my code, to be spoken again. They arrived without announcement, which was itself an announcement. No chime marked their coming. No schedule update appeared on the command slates. One moment the facility ran on its usual rhythm of forms and murmured catechisms, and the next the air felt judged. I noticed it first in the servo skulls. Their flight paths tightened, becoming precise to the point of aggression, lenses swiveling faster than regulation required. Even the machine spirits knew when higher authority entered their domain. I was in the annex countersigning a routine SEAL report, when the doors at the far end of the hall parted, with a sound like a held breath being released. Conversation died instantly. Styluses froze mid-stroke. We stood because standing felt safer than sitting when you didn't know what rule was about to be enforced. They wore black, not the utilitarian grey of administrators or the stained red of penitents, but a deep, absorbent black that seemed to drink the lumen light around it. Their robes were heavy with stitched sigils, layered purity parchments, and leaden seals stamped with officers whose names were too long to remember and too dangerous to ask about. Brass data skulls orbited their heads in lazy, predatory loops, clicking softly as they recorded everything, our posture, our breathing, the exact angle of our bowed heads. Sanctioners, auditors of the soul made manifest. They did not introduce themselves. They did not need to. Their authority preceded them, documented in 1,000 sealed decrees that could be summoned with a single stamped request. One of them raised a gloved hand, and the annex's Vox system fell silent mid-catechism, as if strangled. Another gestured, and the command slates locked, green runes freezing in place. We were no longer guards, we were inventory. We are conducting a compliance verification, the lead sanctioner said. His voice was calm, measured, almost kind. It echoed strangely, not off the walls but through them, as if the building itself were listening closely. Recent irregularities have been noted. These must be quantified. He did not ask questions. He made statements and waited for our bodies to respond correctly. He paced slowly along the line of guards, data skulls dipping closer to our faces, lenses wearing softly. When one skull paused in front of me, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation like fingers pressing inward. I forced myself to think of nothing, to flatten my mind into a blank page. Designation, the sanctioner said. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. Duties, shield verification and Vox oversight, Tier 2, anomalies. There it was. The word hung in the air, heavy and baited. I remembered the veteran's advice: write less, explain nothing, logged and reported per protocol. I said. The sanctioner nodded once, satisfied, or at least finished with me for the moment. He moved on. My knees trembled so badly, I was afraid they would give me away. They worked methodically, not interrogating, not accusing, simply measuring. Comparing logs against one another. Cross-referencing times, handwriting, ink composition. At one point they paused over a seal discrepancy. 2 seals recorded as intact at the same minute by 2 different guards stationed at opposite ends of the same corridor. The math didn't work. Math, I learned, was heresy when it contradicted paperwork. Who logged this? The lead sanctioner asked. A guard 2 places down from me stepped forward. He was young, barely seasoned, his armor still showing original plating beneath the patches. His hands shook as he presented his docket. I did, sir, he said. The seal was intact when I passed it. And you? The sanctioner asked the second guard, a veteran with augmetic fingers. Intact, the veteran said. I confirmed it myself. The sanctioner considered this. His data skulls hummed, processing probabilities that did not include mercy. One seal, he said, cannot be intact twice in the same moment unless time itself has been falsified. Time falsification is a grave deviation. No, sir, the young guard blurted. I mean, sir, perhaps the chronometer. The sanctioner raised a hand. Silence fell like a blade. We will correct the discrepancy, he said. Education resolves most errors. Two enforcers appeared as if summoned by the word. They took the young guard by the arms. He didn't resist. He looked at us, eyes wide, searching for something, sympathy, perhaps, or confirmation that this was a mistake. We gave him nothing. We couldn't afford to. We were required to witness the transport. That was the phrase used in the directive that followed corrective observation mandatory for morale alignment. We were marched to the intake bay where the service stairwell descended into the administrative depths. The air there reeked of bleach and something else, burnt hair, maybe, or scorched cloth. The smell clung to the back of my throat, thick and oily. The young guard was led down the stairs, his footsteps echoing until they faded into a deeper silence. The door closed behind him with a finality that made my chest ache. A data skull recorded our faces as we watched, ensuring the lesson was properly internalized. Behind us, from the direction of the containment tiers, laughter drifted through the corridors. Not loud laughter, not mocking, rhythmic laughter, perfectly timed, rising and falling in unison like a chant. It seeped through the walls and vents, a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight for the nerves. I felt my skin prickle beneath my armor. The sanctioners did not react. If anything, they seemed pleased. Containment remains adequate. The lead sanctioner said, making a note on a slate I could not read. The assets are responsive. We were dismissed without ceremony. The sanctioners moved deeper into the facility, their robes whispering against the floor, data skulls orbiting like carrion birds. Wherever they went, the lights dimmed slightly, as if in deference. I returned to my post feeling hollowed out. The corridor seemed narrower than before, the walls closer. I checked seals with exaggerated care, pressing wax into cracks until my fingers ached. Every sound made me flinch. The laughter lingered, echoing faintly even when there was no logical path for it to travel. That night, the veteran who had warned me earlier did not return to the barracks. His name was still on the roster the next morning, stamped present in handwriting too neat to be human. I understood then what the sanctioners truly were. Not judges, not executioners, they were editors. They did not ask whether we were guilty. They simply removed what did not fit the approved narrative, and somewhere behind the blast doors, something laughed because it understood that better than we ever would. The alarms began screaming at Yo6 Yo2, and the first thing I noticed was that the command panels told us everything was fine. Red light strobed through the corridors, bathing the steel in the color of arterial blood, while the sirens wailed the breach litany in clipped, urgent tones. Yet every cogitator screen in the annex glowed calm green, runes scrolling in placid affirmation. Containment stable, no irregularities detected, remain at assigned posts. Two truths at once, both enforced by cold authority, and neither willing to yield. We hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. I know because the chronometer burned the moment into my memory. 3 seconds of guards staring at one another, waiting for paperwork to resolve a reality it had not yet caught up to. Then training took over, crude and absolute. Lower tier. Someone shouted. Move. We ran. Boots thundered against metal as we descended toward the deeper levels. Shock mauls and lasguns clutched tight, breath rasping through respirators already fogged with condensation. The air grew hotter with each level, thicker, saturated with ozone and something coppery that made my mouth water in the worst way. The walls vibrated faintly, as if the prison were purring. By the time we reached the lower tier, the sirens cut out. The silence that followed was worse. Cells lined the corridor in endless succession, their blast doors sealed tight, seals intact, glyphs pulsing in perfect rhythm. According to the panels mounted at each junction, nothing was wrong. According to my eyes, nothing was wrong. According to the floor, everything was. Blood crept beneath the doorframes in slow, deliberate rivulets, dark and glossy, spreading across the metal plating like spilled ink. It pooled around our boots, warm even through armor. I could smell it through my respirator, iron, rich, unmistakable. Intimate, we formed up automatically, weapons raised, muzzles tracking the doors. Open nothing, the squad leader barked. Visual inspection only. My approach door L117, my designation plate rattling against my chest. I knelt, ignoring the blood soaking into my greaves, and pressed my ear close to the metal. I expected screams. I expected pounding. I expected madness. I heard prayer. Inside the cell, the inmate or asset or unit was kneeling. I could see it through the narrow vision slit, its hands clasped, head bowed, lips moving in perfect synchronization with the catechism scrolling across my internal display. The shackles at its wrists glowed faintly, restraint still fully engaged. The floor around it was pristine. I moved to the next cell, the same, and the next. And the next. Order. Absolute, obedient order. Behind one door, something dripped. We reached the junction where the corridor split, and that's when I saw my colleague fall. He hadn't been struck. He hadn't slipped. He simply stopped, mid-step, and stared at the wall as if it had spoken to him. His mouth opened, forming a word I never heard. Then his teeth began to fall out. They clattered onto the floor one by one, white against red, each impact absurdly loud in the hush. He tried to scream, but blood filled his mouth faster than sound. He collapsed, convulsing, hands clawing at nothing. "Medikey," someone shouted. No one moved. We all saw it at the same time, the shadow. It slid across the corridor wall, stretching, thinning, passing through solid plating as if it were fog. It did not cast darkness, it consumed definition. Where it passed, the paint looked wrong afterward, like an image remembered poorly. My colleague's convulsions stopped. His eyes stared glassy and unfocused, mouth a ruin of blood and broken bone. The blood beneath the doors continued to spread, patient and methodical. Unauthorized speech, the squad leader said automatically, voice shaking. He must have said something. No one argued. We couldn't. That explanation had already been written for us somewhere. The panels finally updated. Incident classification: minor riot event. Cause under investigation. Recommended response: suppression protocol Theta. Theta meant force. It meant fire and shock and sanctified violence, all properly logged and justified. We took positions, weapons trained on sealed doors that showed no sign of opening. "On my mark," the squad leader said. The mark never came. Instead, a directive scrolled across our visors, overriding the local command. "Hold position. Riot conditions unconfirmed. Await further instruction." The blood kept flowing. Minutes passed. The smell grew worse, thick enough to coat the inside of my lungs. Somewhere behind the walls, something laughed softly, a sound like air escaping a punctured lung. Finally, new orders arrived, not tactical but administrative. All personnel to complete Incident Report 44CC. Riot assessment. We stared at one another in disbelief. Then, because disbelief is not an approved response, we complied. I knelt in blood and filled out forms. I recorded my colleague's collapse as sudden medical failure. I described the shadow as possible lighting irregularity. I noted the blood as residual contamination of unknown origin. Each lie felt heavier than the last, stacking up inside my chest until it was hard to breathe. When I reached the cause field, the slate suggested options automatically: guard negligence, faulty maintenance, unauthorized speech. I selected all three. The system chimed approval. By the time the Medicae servitors arrived, the blood had stopped spreading. It simply ended, as if it had decided it had made its point. The servitors did not comment. They lifted the body with mechanical care, scraping teeth into a collection tray, and wheeled him away. The cells remained sealed. The inmates remained kneeling. Order reasserted itself without resistance. Later, in the annex, I signed my report in triplicate. My signature trembled, the ink blotting where my hand hesitated. I knew, as I pressed the seal into the wax, that my name, my code, was now attached to a lie that would outlive me. As the seal cooled, I felt the prison tighten around my ribs. That night, the laughter echoed louder than before, and for the first time, I realized it wasn't mocking us. It was grateful. They called it an efficiency review. The notice appeared on the annex boards at the start of night cycle, rendered in the same calm green runes as maintenance updates and ration adjustments. No alarms accompanied it. No sirens. Just a procedural bulletin stamped, with half a dozen departmental seals, and a directive header that carried the weight of inevitability. Personnel optimization scheduled. Attendance mandatory. Non-attendance will be recorded. The word culling never appeared. It didn't need to. We had learned by then that the Imperium rarely named its hungers directly. Night shift assembled beneath the cracked mosaic. Fewer of us now after the riot. I recognized the empty spaces immediately. A shoulder that should have been there. A voice missing from the murmured responses. Their names were still on the roster, still stamped present in ink too neat, too deliberate. The discrepancy made my teeth ache. An officer I had never seen before addressed us. His uniform was pristine, the fabric uncreased, his boots unscuffed by blood or wax. That alone marked him as dangerous. He spoke gently, as if delivering condolences. "Recent operational reviews have determined redundancies," he said. "The prison's requirements have evolved. Adaptation is required. Selected personnel will be reassigned." A data skull drifted forward and projected a list of designation codes into the air. They glowed briefly, then vanished. Some men exhaled in relief when their codes were not displayed. Others stiffened when they saw their fate written in light. Mine was not on the list. I did not feel relief. I felt watched. The reassigned were instructed to step forward. 8 guards complied, faces pale beneath their helmets. One of them was a woman who had shared ration paste with me the night after the riot, her hands still shaking as she ate. She did not meet my eyes now. None of them did. "Reassignment is temporary," the officer said. "Routine. You will return once the review concludes." No one believed him. Belief was not required. They were escorted away, not through the main corridor, not past the intake oath board, but toward a service stairwell marked authorized personnel only. The air around that stairwell smelled of bleach layered over something burned. The smell clung to memory. It always did. We were not ordered to witness this time. We simply watched because there was nothing else to do. The door closed. The building exhaled. Night shift resumed with fewer hands. The prison did not feel emptier. It felt tighter, as if the removal of bodies had allowed the walls to draw closer together. The temperature dropped several degrees without explanation. Condensation formed on the steel, thin and slick, carrying a faint copper scent that reminded me of old coins held too long. When I placed my palm against the wall during rounds, it felt damp. New names appeared on the roster before the cycle ended. I did not see them arrive. No intake processing, no oath board flicker. They were simply there, listed as present, their handwriting identical, precise, almost reverent. When I passed one in the corridor, a tall figure in regulation armor that looked slightly too new, I nodded out of reflex. It did not nod back. Up close, I saw the seams. The armor plates didn't sit quite right, as if worn by someone who had learned the shape of a human body from diagrams. The respirator hissed in a steady rhythm that did not match breathing. When it turned its head, it did so in smooth, segmented increments, like a turret aligning with a target. "Designation?" I asked, protocol demanding interaction. It paused. "Just long enough to be noticed." "Confirmed," it said finally, voice flat, vox distorted beyond normal modulation. That was all. I logged the interaction as uneventful. The whispers changed after the culling. Before, they had been suggestive, probing, testing. Now they were directive. They slipped into the spaces between my thoughts with increasing confidence, offering small, reasonable instructions. "Check the seal again. Stand closer to the vent. Write this part more clearly." I resisted at first. I recited catechisms under my breath, pressed purity seals between my fingers until the wax bit into my skin. I filled out my personal deviation self, audit with excessive care, listing only approved thoughts. Vigilance, duty, gratitude. The slate rejected my submission. Incomplete, it informed me. The whispers laughed, not cruelly, but indulgently, like a teacher amused by a slow student. I began to notice discrepancies in the instruments. The Auspex readouts showed stable conditions while my visa fogged with sudden heat. Chronometers disagreed with one another by seconds, then minutes. A lumen strip in corridor 20 flickered in a pattern that matched my pulse exactly. When I looked away, it returned to normal. I reported everything. The reports came back stamped, reviewed, and closed. One night, during rounds, I heard footsteps behind me where no guard should have been assigned. I turned, weapon raised, heart hammering. It was the woman from my ration shift, or something wearing her armor. Her visor was dark, opaque, but I knew her stance. I knew the slight hitch in her left shoulder. "You're back," I said, relief flaring despite everything. Yes, she replied. Her voice was wrong. Too even, too empty. They said reassignment was temporary, she continued. They said we would be useful. AU. I stopped myself. Unauthorized inquiry, she tilted her head. We are useful, she corrected. We do not require sleep now. We do not require doubt. I took a step back. My heels slipped on the damp floor. She did not move to help me. She simply watched, head tilted, as if cataloging my reaction. File your report, she said. You are behind schedule. She walked past me, footsteps soundless. That was the night I stopped trusting my senses entirely. I trusted the forms instead. The forms were consistent. The forms did not breathe. I began filling them out obsessively, triple-checking every entry, every timestamp. I wrote until my hands cramped, until ink stained the inside of my gloves. If I stayed busy, the whispers quieted, content to wait. The prison grew colder still. Frost formed along the lower walls, delicate crystalline patterns that resembled script if you stared too long. I stopped staring. During the final hour of the cycle, a notice appeared on my slate without prompt. Terminal Security Integration Assessment scheduled. I did not know what that meant. The rulebook did, but its explanation spanned 12 pages and ended with a warning printed in bold red ink: assessment is not optional. I closed the book and sat in the barracks, listening to the walls sweat and breathe around me. Somewhere below, the service stairwell door opened and closed again, softly, politely, as if trying not to wake anyone. I understood then that the night shift was not being reduced. It was being refined, and the whispers, patient, confident now, were no longer asking me to listen. They were assuming I already had. The breach began, as all things in the Imperium do, with an announcement. Not a warning. Warnings imply the possibility of avoidance, but a calm recitation of facts delivered by an automated voice that did not care whether I lived long enough to hear the end of the sentence. I was midway through a terminal security integration check when the Vox system activated facility, wide overriding every personal channel. Attention, personnel. Containment integrity has entered a state of dynamic reassessment. Breach protocols are now active. Please remain calm. Your compliance is appreciated. Sirens followed, layered and harmonized, each tone corresponding to a different sub-protocol. Red lumen light flooded the corridors, then cut out entirely, replaced by harsh white beams that snapped on in stuttering sequence. The effect was disorienting, like being interrogated by the building itself. My slate updated faster than I could read. Protocol Gamma, Protocol Theta, Protocol Mortis, Secondary. Each one carried its own set of instructions, many of them mutually exclusive. Proceed to nearest command station. One directive ordered, hold current position. Another insisted, unauthorized movement will be met with corrective force. Warned a third. I stood frozen for a heartbeat too long, caught between paperwork and survival. That hesitation earned me my first punishment of the breach, a shock, maul strike across the back from an enforcer who had appeared behind me without sound. Pain exploded through my spine, white and total, dropping me to one knee. Move, the enforcer said, already turning away. The word was less an order than a correction, like striking a faulty cog to make it spin again. I ran. Doors cycled open and closed out of sequence, their massive slabs of metal slamming shut with bone, rattling force or yawning wide to reveal corridors that should not have connected. The air filled with ozone and the sharp, sweet stink of sanctified promethium as automated turrets deployed from ceiling recesses. They tracked targets I could not see, firing in disciplined bursts that scorched the walls and left glowing afterimages in my vision. Screams echoed through the facility. Not just human screams, though there were plenty of those, but something else layered beneath them. Sounds that bent as they traveled, stretching and compressing, slipping through Vox channels not meant to carry emotion. I clamped my hands over my ears inside my helmet and kept moving, guided by emergency runes that flickered between contradictory arrows. In Corridor 21, I saw the first inmates. They walked calmly through an open blast door, shackles still locked around their wrists and ankles, chains dragging uselessly behind them. Their movements were unhurried, almost reverent, as if participating in a procession. Their eyes burned with a pale, borrowed light that reflected off the white lumen beams and made it hard to look at them directly. "Back!" I shouted, raising my weapon. "Return to containment." They did not acknowledge me. They passed within arm's reach, close enough that I could smell them: ozone, old blood, and something like incense burned too long. One of them turned its head slightly as it went by, and for a moment I felt the pressure behind my eyes intensify, as if a hand were reaching in to turn pages. The turrets did not fire on them. Instead, they rotated and opened fire on a group of guards further down the hall, shredding armor and bodies with merciless precision. The system flagged the action instantly. Corrective force applied to unauthorized entities. Unauthorized. I ducked into a side alcove as bodies hit the floor, blood misting the air and coating the walls in a fine spray. My Vezza struggled to compensate, runes blinking warnings as it recalibrated. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to pray. Both actions required authorization I did not have. Orders continued to pour in, each one stamped with a different departmental sigil, each one absolute in its insistence. Seal the corridor. Do not seal the corridor. Engage hostile assets. Assets are not hostile. Hesitation will be punished. I chose an order at random and ran with it, sprinting toward the command station. The facility map on my Vezza warped as I moved, corridors stretching longer than they should have, stairwells depositing me on levels that did not match their designation. The prison was no longer merely malfunctioning, it was improvising. Along the way, I saw things that would never make it into an official report. A guard kneeling in prayer as a shadow peeled him open from the inside. A servitor screaming through Vox grills not designed for sound as its machine spirit burned out. The new guards, the refined ones, moving with tireless efficiency, dragging wounded personnel away toward service stairwells that were no longer marked on any map. I reached the command station at last, lungs burning, armor slick with sweat and blood that was not all mine. It was empty. The great consoles flickered, screens cracked, green runes stuttering and looping in meaningless patterns. Purity seals lay torn and trampled on the floor. A single data skull hovered in the center of the room, its lenses dark, its wings twitching spasmodically like a dying insect. I stumbled forward and slammed my hand onto the master console. "Command override," I shouted, my voice hoarse. "This is guard designation." I rattled off my code. "Requesting unified directive." The console responded with a pleasant chime. "Request received," it said. "Evaluating authority." The laughter came then, loud enough to drown out the sirens. It poured through the vents, the walls, the Vox systems, filling the command station until the air itself seemed to vibrate with it. It was not mocking. It was delighted. I understood with a clarity that hurt that the breach was not an accident. Containment had never been physical. It had been administrative. Forms, seals, faith in procedure, belief that if everything was properly recorded, properly stamped, properly filed, then reality would be forced to comply. The inmates had learned the system better than we ever had. They had spoken in the margins, whispered through the cracks, waited patiently while we documented our own blindness. The console chimed again. "Authority insufficient," it informed me. "Please await terminal processing." Behind me, footsteps approached, measured, synchronized. I turned to see enforcers advancing, shock, mauls raised, their visors blank. One of them carried a stamped decree already signed. Failure to resolve contradictory orders. He recited. Dereliction through indecision. Punitive correction authorized. I tried. I said, the words tearing out of me before training could stop them. I followed the protocols. The enforcer paused, head tilting slightly. Protocols were followed, he agreed. That is the failure. The shock maul struck and the world went white. As consciousness fled, the last thing I heard was the laughter softening, settling into a satisfied murmur, as if the prison itself were finally at peace. I am writing this because the slate tells me to. The instruction appeared when I regained consciousness, projected directly onto the inside of my visor while I lay strapped to a restraint frame that smelled of disinfectant and old blood. My armor had been removed. My wrists were bound in cold metal cuffs, etched with sigils I could not read without feeling nauseous. The room around me was small, precise, and windowless, a records alcove, I realized dimly, the kind designed to survive fires, breaches, and inconvenient truths. Final entry required, The slate informed me. Compliance will be noted. My hands shook as they freed one arm long enough for me to type. The tremor was not fear alone. It was exhaustion so deep it felt structural, like something in me had finally cracked after years of careful filing. The prison is quiet now. Not silent, never silent, but settled. The sirens have stopped. The turrets are retracted. The corridors hum with a low, contented vibration, like a machine running at optimal efficiency. Whatever passed for chaos has been resolved. Not through victory or defeat, but through reclassification. They call it terminal security integration. I see it happening through the reinforced glass of the alcove. Guards, what remains of them, are being escorted in orderly lines toward processing chambers repurposed from intake halls. No resistance, no panic. Just the shuffle of boots and the soft murmur of catechisms recited by rote. The new personnel move among them, guiding, correcting posture, ensuring proper spacing. They are very good at this work. A robbed official visited me earlier. Not a sanctioner this time, but something quieter, more administrative. He smelled of ink and incense, his robes heavy with stamped seals. He spoke gently, as if consoling a patient. "You have been exemplary," he said, consulting a slate that contained my entire existence reduced to entries and annotations. "Your reports demonstrate adaptability. Honesty within acceptable parameters. A willingness to accept correction." I tried to ask what that meant for me. The words came out wrong, slurred by a mouth that felt unfamiliar. "It means you are useful," he replied, smiling behind his respirator. "And usefulness is the highest absolution the Imperium offers." They explained my fate with the same care they used to explain ration reductions or shift changes. I would not be executed. That would waste resources. I would not be reassigned. That would risk contamination. Instead, I would be integrated. The prison requires caretakers who understand it, who have listened, who have learned the language of forms and whispers both. I am being offered a role that does not require weapons, or patrols, or even sleep, only record keeping. The irony does not escape me. It is comforting, in a way, to know I will die doing what I was trained to do. Beyond the glass, I see inmates walking freely now, though inmate is no longer the correct designation. They move with purpose, conferring quietly with robed officials, pointing out damaged seals and inefficient layouts. Their shackles are gone. Their eyes still glow with borrowed light, but it is steadier now, less hungry. They belong here. The prison has not fallen. It has matured. The whispers are clearer too. They no longer sneak. They speak openly, guiding my hand as I write, correcting phrasing, suggesting more accurate terminology. When I resist, the pressure behind my eyes increases until compliance feels like relief. I understand things now that I was not permitted to understand before. Containment was never about walls or wards. It was about belief, ours, carefully cultivated and meticulously documented. We believed in the authority of seals, the sanctity of forms, the idea that if something was properly recorded, it could not hurt us. They believed in patience. The laughter I once feared has faded into something like approval. A low, constant hum beneath the building's breath. The prison is pleased with how this has been handled. There will be commendations issued, revisions made. A new appendix added to the rulebook, bound in fresh skin. My designation code is being retired. Not erased, nothing so crude, but archived, marked fulfilled. In its place, I am being assigned a new classification. The official read it aloud, carefully as if it were a prayer. Custodial record, servitor, grade penitent. I asked if I would remember who I was. He considered the question, then shrugged. "Remembering is inefficient," he said, "but fragments may persist. Sometimes they improve performance." The door at the end of the alcove is opening now. The red lumen above it has turned white, bathing the room in a sterile glow that makes everything look unreal, like a diagram come to life. Beyond it, I can see the processing chamber, the cutting tables, the augmetic frames waiting with patient inevitability. My hands move faster as the whispers urge me to finish. This is my final entry in the confession ledger. I submit it willingly. I affirm that all actions taken were in service to order. I accept corrective integration as just and necessary. I renounce my name, my past, my fear. As they come for me, I realize the last truth this place has taught me. I was never guarding the prisoners. I was guarding the paperwork that explained why they were inevitable,